Welcome to your second lesson from our online CAD curriculum, where we'll be focusing on grouping and manipulating shapes. Let's start by importing a basic cube into the work plane from the Basic Shapes menu, and remember that you can use any of the shapes that the Tinkercad software provides through these menus. I'm just going to zoom in here so we can see a little better, and I want us to pay attention to the different markings that are on the sides of the cube. Also notice how when an object is selected, the same drop-down menu that we used to change the color in last week's lesson also has sliders that we can use to adjust the length, width, height, and other measurements of the object. We can change the length or width of the object by dragging the black points on the side of the cube or the corners, which will adjust the length and width at the same time. We can see what the length is set to in terms of exact measurement by clicking on the corner or sides, and by doing this we can also select the white box and select the exact measurement we want to change. You can use the sliders over here that measure length and width to also change the different measurements of whatever cube or block you are using, but I would recommend using one of the other methods as these sliders can cause extreme manipulation. You can also adjust the height of a block using the white navigator on top of every block, and we can also do the same as we did for length and width and type in an exact height. We can also adjust height using the slider. But as with the length and width, these are very extreme manipulations that if you're trying to be more exact, I would recommend either dragging the block yourself or typing in the exact measurement. Blocks also do not have to remain on the work plane. The black cones above and below the blocks can be used to lift or lower an object without manipulating its size or shape. Like other measurements, an exact position can be specified when clicking on these tools. Notice how two measurements appear. The first, which appears above or below the block, is the vertical distance from the block's last position. The second, which appears beside the block, is the vertical distance from the work plane. So if I were to enter a vertical distance of 2, that would be the distance from the work plane to the bottom of the block. If I were to also change the value of the other box to 2, then notice how the overall distance from the work plane would be 4 because it's 2 measurements from the last position, which was also 2. Notice the curved double-ended arrows that are on each side of the block. We can use these to rotate the block. By clicking this symbol and dragging along the circular path that appears, we can adjust the block in specific increments, or outside of the circle, we can be a little more precise. Like the other measurements, we can also click on the measurement box that appears and type in a specific value. This is true for any of the angles that we want to manipulate. We can do it this way or the other way, which is very helpful when you want to be specific on how you position the blocks that you are using. I've imported a few other blocks from the Basic Shapes menu so that we can investigate the steps and radius sliders on the drop-down menu. So for the sphere, steps refers to how defined a curve will look. The greater the number of steps on the slider, the more curved or smooth that curve will look. On non-spherical blocks, the radius slider rounds sharp edges, and the steps, similar to the sphere, refers to how smooth those rounded edges will look. The greater the steps, the more smooth they'll look. The sliders for the cylinder, while they go by different names, essentially have the same functions. The sides is similar to the steps slider for the sphere, which refers to how many sections that will contribute to how smooth the curve of the cylinder looks. Bevel will round the corners, or sharp edges, of the cylinder. And segments refers to how smooth and rounded out those edges look. I'm going to move these two objects together so that we can go over grouping. Grouping binds two or more objects together so that they can both be moved at the same time without changing their relation to each other. Essentially, grouping creates a new shape. Note that grouping will make both objects the same color. To group, click one of the objects that you want to group, then select the other object using the Shift key on your keyboard. Once both or more objects are selected, click the Grouping button on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Notice how both objects are now blue, and I can move them around together since they are now a single shape. This can be essentially useful when you are creating more complex designs and you need more complex shapes, because you can use any one of the shapes, basic or other, that Tinkercad provides for unlimited possibilities. If you're worried that you're going to accidentally separate or manipulate part of a design that you don't want to, when you are trying to work on a different part of your design, grouping objects together or locking it using this tool right here might be the right way to go for you. But how do we reverse this process? We can just click on the shapes that we have grouped together that are now working as one shape, and just click the Ungrouping button next to the Group button that we used to group them in the first place. And now we can select each of them individually, and they are two shapes once again. You can also manipulate shapes and make new shapes by putting holes in them. There are a few different ways of doing this that I'll go over today. Making holes in shapes is essentially the same as grouping them, except that one of the objects is a hole and will disappear when grouped, leaving behind an open space. We can do this by using some of the pre-made holes that Tinkercad gives us in the basic shapes section in the shape of a box or a cylinder, which are usually most common. I'm going to use a cylinder today to demonstrate. Resize it to what I want it to be, and then group like normal by selecting the hole and the shape that I want to put the hole in. Click the Group button, and we can see that the cube now has a cylinder-shaped hole in the center. If I undo this, I'll also show you how to do this with any shape that you want. If I want to put a concave in the top of the box, I'm going to select the sphere and just click the hole option. It will appear transparent, and I can move it into the cube, select both, and then group. You can do this with any number of shapes to make whatever kind of new formations that you want. That concludes this week's lesson in manipulating shapes, grouping, and making holes with Tinkercad. Make sure to practice and stay creative, and save any questions you have for your teacher during class.